Okay, so let's get into this. We're about to wade into some, well, some pretty interesting waters here.
Yeah, interesting is one word for it. Controversial, maybe.
Controversial, fascinating, and, I mean, let's be honest, a little bizarre at times.
It's probably the best word for it. Bizarre.
We're talking about a figure who, depending on who you ask, is either a defender of traditional American values,
A patriot, yeah.
or a demagogue, or even a rodeo clown.
And that last one is the most fascinating part because he's called himself that.
Yes, which is, a surprisingly self-aware thing to say for someone who also traffics in these very, very serious, often apocalyptic prophecies.
It really frames the whole conversation, doesn't it? It's like, what are we watching here? Is this a performance or is this a prophecy? Or is there even a difference in his mind?
Exactly. And that's what we're going to try and unpack today. We are doing a deep dive into the life, the media empire, and, I guess, the mind of Glenn Beck.
And the source material we're working from, this comprehensive biographical overview, it paints a picture that's just so much more complex than the caricature.
Right. It's not just the guy who cries at a chalkboard.
Not at all. I mean, when you really look at the trajectory, you're looking at a case study in modern media evolution.
It's the story of how news and entertainment sort of melted into each other in the 21st century.
Absolutely. It's a story about personal reinvention, about that blurring line between being a newsman and being an entertainer. And frankly, it's about business innovation. He was years ahead of the curve on some of this stuff.
Which is the part people forget. So our mission for this deep dive is, I think, pretty specific. We really want to understand how a guy who starts out as a top 40 morning zoo DJ,
Literally doing prank calls.
silly voices, all of it.
Mm.
How does that guy transform into this massively polarizing political icon?
And not just an icon, but a builder. A guy who built a $40 million subscription streaming empire.
In 2011, years before Netflix or Disney Plus made that the default.
While, and this is crucial, while battling crippling addiction, severe health crises that were literally affecting his brain, and facing these huge public boycotts that would have just ended most other people's careers.
It's a survival story as much as it's a media story.
It really is.
So let's go back to the beginning, because I think with a figure this larger than life, we sort of assume they were hatched in a lab somewhere at Fox News headquarters.
Right, that they just appeared fully formed.
But the origin story is, it's almost tragically human. It starts in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, Everett, Washington, Glenn Beck, born in 1964. And if you just look at the early details, it feels like this almost aggressively normal piece of Americana.
What do you mean?
Well, his family had these deep roots. They were descended from German immigrants who came over in the 9th century, and they owned a bakery, a family bakery in Mount Vernon.
That sounds so idyllic. Like you can almost smell the yeast in the rain just from that description.
It does sound like a postcard, doesn't it? He was raised Roman Catholic, so on the surface, you're looking at a very standard, blue-collar American childhood.
But you said on the surface, so that normalcy was, what, a thin veneer?
A very thin veneer. Because then, at age 15, everything just shatters.
1979, this is the moment, isn't it? The determining trauma of his entire life.
Absolutely. His mother drowned in the Puget Sound.
And the details around this they're really murky, right? In his version of events, this wasn't just a straightforward accident.
Extremely murky. She was out on a small boat with a male companion fishing in Commencement Bay, which is just west of Tacoma.
Okay.
The police report at the time was inconclusive. They said, she might have fallen overboard, or maybe her companion fell and she drowned trying to rescue him. Officially, it was ruled a drowning, an accident.
But Beck.
But Beck has a completely different narrative, a much darker one.
What does he say happened?
In interviews, in his own books, he refers to it explicitly as a suicide. He is convinced she took her own life.
Wow. And if you're 15 years old, I mean, the difference between my mom had a tragic accident and my mom chose to leave me, that's an abyss.
It's an abyss. It fundamentally changes how you view the world, how you view trust, stability, everything. It puts a crack in the foundation of your entire reality.
That is just such a heavy burden for a teenager to carry. And the source material mentions this wasn't the only tragedy around that time, was it?
No. It gets worse. Shortly after his mother's death, a stepbrother also committed suicide.
Oh, my God.
So you have a teenager dealing with these compounding, catastrophic losses. He's just standing in the wreckage of his family structure with no idea how to process any of it.
So how do you even cope with that at 15, 16 years old?
Well, he didn't. He numbed it. That's the long and short of it. He has this phrase he uses. He says he turned to Dr. Jack Daniels to coach.
Dr. Jack Daniels. It's one of those phrases that sounds almost like a kitschy country song title, but it's hiding a really, really dark reality.
A very dark reality. He graduates from high school in '82 and basically just tries to run away from the pain. He moves to Provo, Utah at 18, gets a job at a radio station there.
But he said he didn't fit in, right?
Yeah, he said he didn't fit in. He only lasted 6 months before he packed up and moved to Washington, D.C. But it didn't matter where he went. The geography was irrelevant because the addiction, that was his travel companion.
And he admitted later how bad it was.
He was incredibly candid about it. He said that starting at age 16, for 15 years, he got high every single day.
Every day. For 15 years. That's, I mean, that's not just partying. That's functioning on a razor's edge.
It's self-medication on an epic scale. Plus, you have to add severe alcoholism on top of that. And somehow he was functioning professionally, at least to a degree. He was getting gigs, moving up in radio markets, but internally, he was just completely falling apart.
He was masking this deep, existential rot.
Totally. Which all leads, as it so often does, to what we call rock bottom.
Right. And for him, that was around 1994.
Yeah. By 1994, the facade has crumbled. He's divorced from his first wife, Claire. He's struggling professionally, bouncing between stations. And he's actively suicidal.
He described it in pretty vivid detail, didn't he?
Very vivid. He talked about imagining shooting himself while listening to Kurt Cobain's music.
Which is such a dark image. I mean, Kurt Cobain, another tragic figure from Washington State who died that very same year.
The parallels were likely not lost on him at all. Cobain took his own life in April of '94. Beck was standing on that same ledge, looking into that same abyss and imagining the end.
But he pulls back. He finds a way out of the hole.
He does. He finds a ladder, and he gives all the credit to Alcoholics Anonymous. He went to his first AA meeting in November of 1994. He quit drinking. He quit smoking cannabis that same month. It was a hard stop. And you can draw a straight line from that moment to everything that came after. That moment of sobriety is the pivot point for his entire life.
Without that, there's no media empire.
Yeah.
There's no Fox News show. The Glenn Beck that we all know was essentially born in that AA meeting.
100%.
So he gets clean. He clears the fog from his head. But he's not Glenn Beck, the political pundit, yet.
Yeah.
Not even close. He's still a radio DJ. And I think people either forget or never knew just how juvenile his early career was.
Juvenile's being polite. Goofy might be a better word. This is the morning zoo era of radio. He wasn't on the air discussing the Federalist Papers. He was doing skits and prank calls.
Right. His first big show in Louisville was called Captain Beck and the A-Team.
Captain Beck, and please tell me there was a costume.
The promotional photos show a cape. So yes, there was a cape.
Of course there was.
And it was exactly what you'd expect from that name. It was juvenile jokes, celebrity impersonations, wacky sound effects.
Yeah.
Just standard morning show stuff for the time.
But you can see the seeds of his later shock jock style starting to emerge even then. He was learning a very important lesson of media.
Which is?
That conflict and cruelty get attention much, much faster than kindness and consensus.
And there's a specific story from his time in Phoenix that just, it really highlights this. It made me wince just reading the description of it.
You have to be talking about the Y95 incident. It's brutal. It's really hard to read.
So set the scene. He's in Phoenix. He's in a ratings war with a local host at a rival station.
Right, a classic radio rivalry. And Beck decides he's going to take the gloves off in a way that is, it's hard to justify his entertainment.
What did he do?
He got the rival host's wife's phone number, and he called her on the air.
Okay, that's already crossing a line.
It gets so much worse. She had recently, very tragically, suffered a miscarriage.
Oh, no.
And Glenn Beck got on the air and mocked her about it.
Wow.
Wow.
That's just staggering. That's not a prank. That's not a radio bit. That is a level of personal cruelty that goes way beyond shock jock.
It really does. It highlights this willingness to break any and all taboos just to get a reaction, to get attention. It showed that he had no floor. He would go as low as he thought was necessary to win the segment, to win the day's ratings battle.
And this wasn't an isolated incident of, racial or ethnic insensitivity either. There was another one, right? The gong incident.
Yeah, that was in 1995 when he was working in New Haven, Connecticut. He was talking to a Chinese-American caller on the air.
And let me guess, he broke out an offensive accent.
A mock accent. And he had his producer play a gong sound effect in the background while the person was trying to talk. It led to protests, as you can imagine. Activist groups got involved. the station had to issue a public apology for his behavior. So you see this pattern emerging, pushing boundaries, using shock, using caricature, using personal cruelty. He was learning how to manipulate outrage long before he ever applied it to national politics.
So how does he make the leap? How do you go from being the gong guy who makes fun of miscarriages to a serious political talk radio titan? That seems like a massive jump in credibility.
Well, the pivot really happens around the year 2000. He gets a job at WFLA in Tampa, and he launches the Glenn Beck program. And this is where he starts to shift from pure shock to political commentary.
It worked.
Oh, it worked like crazy. The numbers don't lie. He took that afternoon time slot in Tampa from 18th place in the market all the way to first place.
In how long?
In a single year.
That's a meteoric rise. I mean, say what you will about the content, but the man clearly understands the medium of radio.
He's a master of it. He understands pacing. He understands audience engagement. He knows how to hold a listener through a commercial break. And the big players noticed. Premier radio networks picked him up and syndicated him nationwide.
And by the late 2000s, he's a huge name.
A huge name. By 2008, he was the 4th highest-rated radio host in the entire country. We're talking 6.5 million listeners a day.
Right.
He wasn't just some local DJ anymore. He was a national voice with a massive, dedicated following.
And naturally, when you have that kind of radio success, TV comes calling.
It's the inevitable next step. And this brings us into the television era, which is where he really becomes a household name.
So we're entering the world of cable news. This is where the visuals start to match the voice, right?
Yeah.
He starts at CNN headline news, of all places.
Yeah, which seems like such an odd fit in retrospect. From 2006 to 2008, they branded his show as an unconventional look at the news.
Which I guess is one way to put it.
CNN was trying to be a bit edgy, trying to capture a different audience. And, you know, it worked. The ratings were good. He had the second largest audience on the entire network.
Who was number one?
Nancy Grace.
Nancy Grace and Glenn Beck on the same network. That is a lot of high-octane emotion in one primetime lineup.
It really was. But the real explosion, the thing that turns him from a TV host into a cultural phenomenon, happens in 2009 when he moves to Fox News.
The Fox News years. This is peak Beck. The Obama administration had just started. The Tea Party is bubbling up. It was the perfect storm.
It was absolute ratings gold for them. I mean, at his peak, he was drawing more viewers than CNN, MSNBC, and HLN combined in his time slot.
Combined.
He was a juggernaut. There was nothing else like him on television.
But the style.
Yeah.
It changed, didn't it? It wasn't just conservative news commentary anymore. It became something much more theatrical, much darker.
Much darker. His own colleague at Fox, Shepard Smith, who was, very much a straight news guy.
Right.
He called Beck's studio the Fear Chamber, which Beck apparently didn't like. He preferred his own term for it.
Which was?
The Doom Room.
The Doom Room. That sounds less like a TV studio and more like a heavy metal venue or a haunted house attraction at a carnival.
And it fit the content perfectly. This is where the chalkboard becomes his signature prop.
Ah, yes, the chalkboard.
He'd stand in front of it with this frantic energy, and he'd use it to connect all these seemingly diverse data points into these elaborate, sprawling theories. He'd draw an arrow from a quote from Woodrow Wilson in 1913 to a new government program in 2009.
Creating this visual web of conspiracy.
Exactly. It was visually compelling. It made the viewer feel like they were being let in on a huge secret. Like everyone else is asleep, but here in the Doom Room, Glenn is showing us the real truth.
But the rhetoric was also becoming incredibly, almost unbelievably inflammatory. And it started to have real-world fallout.
It did. The biggest example, the one that really defined that era for him, came in the summer of 2009. He was on Fox and Friends in the morning.
Okay.
And he was discussing President Obama. And he said on live television that he believed the president was a racist who has a deep-seated hatred for white people.
He called the first black president a racist who hates white people.
Yes. And the backlash was immediate, and it was massive. An activist group called Color of Change launched a huge campaign targeting his advertisers.
And it worked.
It worked incredibly well. 57 advertisers dropped his show. We're talking Walmart, CVS, Best Buy, Progressive Insurance. Mainstream corporate America just fled from him.
Did he ever walk that back?
He did years later. He apologized, calling it a terrible mistake of his big fat mouth.
Yeah.
But in the moment, the damage was done. It really polarized his public standing. For his fans, he was a truth teller under attack. For everyone else, he was becoming radioactive.
And eventually he leaves Fox, which was a huge shock at the time. It wasn't a quiet exit either.
Yeah. Not at all. He left in June of 2011. And the reasoning behind it is fascinating because you get two different stories.
What was Beck's version?
Beck's version was that the show had become more than a show. It had become a movement, and a movement doesn't belong on a TV network. He was saying he had outgrown television. He wanted to change the culture, not just read from a teleprompter.
And what was the Fox version? From Roger Ailes.
Ailes, who was the head of Fox News, had a much more pragmatic take. He basically said their goals had diverged. Beck wanted to be a full-time activist, and Ailes needed to produce a daily television show that could sell soap and pickup trucks. The two things were no longer compatible.
Which brings us to the next phase of his career. And honestly, from a purely business standpoint, this is the part that impresses me the most. He leaves the biggest, most powerful cable news network on the planet to go. What? Independent.
He essentially decided to bet on himself. He had founded his own parent company, Mercury Radio Arts, way back in 2002.
And the name is significant, right?
Very significant.
Yeah.
He named it after Orson Welles' Mercury Theater.
The guy who did the War of the Worlds radio broadcast and panicked the entire nation.
Exactly. So that tells you something about how Beck sees himself. He sees himself in that lineage of great disruptive storytellers.
So what does he do with Mercury Radio Arts after leaving Fox?
In 2011, right after he leaves, he launches TheBlaze TV. Originally, it was called GBTV, and the revolutionary part was the business model. It was a subscription-based internet television network.
We really have to contextualize this for a second. This is 2011. Netflix's first big original show, House of Cards, is still 2 years away. Disney Plus is almost a decade away. People were not used to paying for content on the web.
Not at all. The conventional wisdom was that the internet was free. People thought he was absolutely crazy to walk away from a guaranteed multi-million-dollar cable contract to ask people to pay him directly over the internet.
But the gamble paid off.
In a massive way. In the first year alone, it was estimated that the service generated somewhere between $27 and $40 million.
$40 million in the first year.
He had over 300,000 subscribers paying him directly every month. He completely cut out the middleman, the cable companies, the advertisers who had abandoned him. It was a direct-to-consumer media business before that was a buzzword.
There was that Forbes quote about him, right? It really summed it up.
Yeah, Forbes said he had figured out how to monetize virtually everything that comes out of his mouth.
And it wasn't just the subscriptions. We're talking books, clothing lines.
Everything. He has his own publishing imprint with Simon & Schuster called Mercury Inc. They've had 6 New York Times bestsellers. He launched a clothing line called 1791, named after the year the Bill of Rights was ratified.
And he writes fiction, too.
He does. He writes political thrillers like The Overton Window, and he also writes these very sentimental, inspirational stories like The Christmas Sweater. He built an entire lifestyle brand for the paranoid, patriotic, and pious conservative.
The man is a content machine. But let's get into the content of that content now.
Yeah.
We need to unpack his actual ideology. Because he's not just a standard issue Republican.
No, not at all. He identifies as a conservative, but with very strong libertarian leanings. His key values are the things you'd expect. Private charity over government welfare, limited government, individual gun ownership.
But where he really carves out his own unique niche is in his fierce opposition to progressivism.
Right. He doesn't just disagree with progressivism. He talks about it like it's a sentient evil.
He calls it a disease, right?
Literally. He has called it a cancer or a disease that has been eating away at the Constitution for over 100 years. He traces it all the way back to figures like Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt.
So he sees this century-long plot to dismantle the American experiment.
A plot, that's the key word. And he takes it a step further with what he called his Crime, Inc. theory.
Crime, Inc. That sounds like the title of a mob movie. What's the theory?
It's a conspiracy theory, effectively. He alleges that there is a clandestine plot happening right now to take over the United States and that it involves a network of powerful people. He names figures like the activist Van Jones, the academic Cass Sunstein, and the financier George Soros as key players.
And this is where the chalkboard would usually come out on his show.
This is prime chalkboard material, connecting all these dots with lines and arrows. And a huge, huge influence on this entire worldview is a writer that most people had never heard of before Beck. A man named W. Cleon Skousen.
Skousen, yeah, that's a name that kept popping up in the research. Who was he? What's his story?
Skousen was a very controversial author and academic, an anti-communist figure from the mid-20th century. He wrote these books like The 5,000-Year Leap and The Naked Communist.
Okay.
And he was closely associated with groups like the John Birch Society. These were groups that saw communist subversion and conspiracy in everything, from the civil rights movement to the fluoridation of public water supplies.
So fringe Cold War-era paranoia.
Exactly. And Beck found these books, which had been out of print for decades, dusted them off, and started promoting them relentlessly on his show. He single-handedly propelled them to the top of the Amazon bestseller charts.
So he was basically mainstreaming the fringe?
That's a perfect way to put it. Critics started calling Beck a Skousenite. He took this old-school John Birch Society-style paranoia and updated it for the 21st century, swapping out communists for progressives.
Let's talk about some of the specific controversies that came out of this ideology.
Yeah.
Because there have been some really big ones. You mentioned Van Jones.
Right. So Van Jones was President Obama's Green Jobs advisor in 2009, a relatively low-level White House position.
Right.
Beck launched this relentless nightly campaign against him. He focused on Jones's past radical political affiliations from years earlier, petitions he had signed, things like that.
And what happened?
It worked. The pressure became so intense that Van Jones resigned. It was a clear demonstration of Beck's power at the time. He claimed a major scout from the Obama administration.
But then there was the whole thing with Acorn.
Yes, the community organizing group. Beck heavily promoted the undercover videos made by James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles, which purported to show Acorn employees giving advice on how to break the law.
And those videos went viral.
They exploded. And based on the outrage that Beck and others generated, Congress voted to cut all federal funding to Acorn. The organization eventually had to disband.
But what did the later investigations find?
Well, that's the thing. Later investigations by multiple authorities, including the California Attorney General, found that the videos were heavily edited and actually cleared Acorn of any criminal wrongdoing. But by then, the damage was done. The organization was already destroyed.
So he's incredibly effective at shaping a narrative. But then there are the comments that go, well, way over the line, even for his supporters. The comments about George Soros come to mind.
That was a definite low point, even for him. He was building this case against George Soros as this puppet master of the progressive movement.
Right.
And in doing so, he accused Soros, who is a Jewish man and a Holocaust survivor, of helping to send his fellow Jews to the death camps when he was just a boy.
Which is, I mean, that's a horrific accusation to level against anyone, let alone a Holocaust survivor.
It's a grotesque distortion of his life story. The Anti-Defamation League called the comments horrific and totally off limits. Soros was a child, a teenager hiding from the Nazis, pretending to be Christian just to survive. And Beck twisted that survival story into a story of collaboration with evil. It was widely and deservedly condemned.
And it wasn't a one-off. There was the incident with the Norway attacks, too.
Yeah, that was in 2011. A right-wing terrorist named Anders Breivik bombed government buildings in Oslo and then went to a summer camp on an island.
A political summer camp, right?
Exactly. It was run by the youth wing of the Norwegian Labour Party. He went there and methodically shot and killed dozens of teenagers. It was a horrific massacre.
What was Beck's take on it?
Beck's take was to go on his radio show and compare the victims, the teenagers who were being hunted and murdered, to Hitler Youth.
He compared the victims of a mass shooting to Hitler Youth.
His logic, if you can call it that, was that it was a political camp, and that sending your kids to a political camp was like what the Nazis did. It sparked international outrage. The Norwegian ambassador condemned him.
It just shows that shock jock instinct again, doesn't it? That willingness to say the most inflammatory thing possible, even in the face of an unimaginable tragedy.
He couldn't just mourn the kids. He had to use their deaths to make a political point about political camps. It was a profound failure of basic human empathy.
I want to pivot here to something that might explain some of his worldview, or at least how he frames it, his faith. Because we mentioned he was raised Catholic, but he's very famously a Mormon now.
Yes. And this conversion story is central to his personal narrative. After he got sober in '94, he went on what he calls a spiritual quest.
He was searching for answers.
Desperately. He describes going to bookstores and just reading voraciously. He has this great phrase for it. He says he read a serial killer library.
A serial killer library? What does that even mean?
He says he was reading books by Hitler and Nietzsche, but also by Billy Graham and Carl Sagan, just trying to understand good and evil and the meaning of life. He even took a theology class at Yale, apparently on the recommendation of Senator Joe Lieberman, but he dropped out early.
So he's shopping around for a belief system.
He is. And he eventually found the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was baptized in 1999. And the person who baptized him was his longtime radio partner, Pat Gray.
So how does that Mormon theology then impact his political commentary?
It's hugely significant because in Mormon theology, there's a strong belief that the U.S. Constitution is a divinely inspired document, not just a good legal framework written by smart men, but literally inspired by God.
So when he defends the Constitution,
He's not just defending a political document. In his mind, he's defending Scripture. It elevates the stakes of every political debate to a cosmic battle between good and evil, between the divine plan and those who would destroy it.
but that must create some tension, right?
Yeah.
Because a huge chunk of his audience, especially in the early days, was evangelical Christian.
A huge tension, and historically there's been a lot of friction there. Some very conservative evangelicals view Mormonism with deep suspicion, or even as a non-Christian cult.
So how does he navigate that?
He has to walk this very careful tightrope. The sources describe him as acting as a theological bridge, especially for political figures like Mitt Romney, who is also a Mormon. Beck tries to focus on shared social values, shared patriotism, to unite these groups against their common enemy, the progressives.
Okay, we mentioned his health struggles earlier, but I want to circle back to that because the source material lists some really specific and harrowing issues that go beyond just addiction.
It does. It's a whole litany of suffering that he's been very public about. In 2010, at the height of his Fox News fame, he announced that he had been diagnosed with macular dystrophy.
Which affects your vision.
Right. He told his audience he might go blind. He was literally preparing to lose his sight while being the most watched man on cable news.
That's incredible pressure. And then there were the brain issues.
Yeah, this is maybe the most shocking part. In 2014, he revealed that for years he had been suffering from a severe neurological disorder. He said it caused seizures, intense pain, and it made him look crazy and feel crazy.
Feel crazy. I mean, that adds a whole new layer to that whole doom room era, doesn't it? If he's experiencing serious neurological distress while hosting those shows.
It certainly provides a potential context for some of the erratic behavior and the extreme emotionality. He said it got so bad he couldn't remember the names of his own children.
That's terrifying.
He credited a practice called chiropractic neurology with helping him recover, but it was clearly a debilitating and terrifying time for him.
And then more recently, COVID-19.
Yeah, he had the virus twice. The second time, in early 2022, he said it got into his lungs and was a much more serious case. So his physical health has been this constant, ongoing struggle right alongside his career.
Now, here is where the story, for me, gets really, really interesting. The Trump arc.
Yeah.
Because you would think, based on everything we've discussed, this right-wing, anti-establishment firebrand, he'd be the first guy on the Trump train.
You'd think so, right. But he was the absolute opposite.
In the 2016 election, Beck was one of the most prominent never-Trumpers in the entire conservative media.
Staunchly never Trump. He didn't just dislike the guy, he seemed to loathe him on a moral level. He endorsed Ted Cruz in the primaries. When Cruz dropped out, he endorsed the independent Evan McMullin.
And he didn't pull any punches in his criticism of Trump.
Not at all. He called Trump an immoral man. He said he was a narcissist. At one point, he even compared him to Hitler.
He compared the eventual Republican nominee to Hitler. That's a strong stance to take in conservative media.
He was a very strong stance. And it cost him. He actually got suspended from his SiriusXM radio show for a while because of an interview with a fiction author who was on his show. The guest was talking about a hypothetical scenario where a president was abusing patriots and wondered aloud what a patriot would do in that situation. It was interpreted by many as a veiled threat against Trump.
And his audience. They weren't with him on this, were they?
Not at all. His audience was overwhelmingly boarding the Trump train, and here was their leader, Glenn Beck, standing on the tracks trying to stop it. He lost a lot of listeners, a lot of influence during that period.
Big. He came around.
He did a complete 180-degree reversal, the great reversal.
What did that look like?
By 2018, you see him on camera wearing a Magsy hat. He starts praising Trump's record, calling it pretty damn amazing. And by the 2020 election, he was fully back on board, predicting that a defeat for Trump would mean the end of the country as we know it.
That is a massive, massive reversal.
Yeah.
Do you think it was a genuine change of heart, or was it a business decision? Reading the room and realizing where his audience was.
That is the million-dollar question with Glenn Beck, always. Is it conviction or is it performance? He's a survivor. He definitely saw where the movement was going. But you also have to remember his binary apocalyptic worldview. Once he frames the opposition, the left, the progressives, as this ultimate country-ending evil, then supporting Trump, no matter his flaws, becomes the necessary logical countermove in his mind. The enemy of my enemy is my savior.
And we can't ignore his activism. He's not just a talker. He puts his money and his energy where his mouth is.
He absolutely does. He's a master organizer. He holds these massive rallies. The Restoring Honor rally in 2010.
At the Lincoln Memorial.
At the Lincoln Memorial, on the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, he co-opted that sacred space of the civil rights movement for his own message of patriotism and faith. And the crowd was enormous. Estimates put it around 87,000 people.
It was a massive show of force for the Tea Party movement at the time.
A huge show of force. And he did another one, Restoring Courage, in Jerusalem the next year to show solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people.
And his charity work it's also complicated. It's not what you'd expect.
Mercury One is his charity organization. And there was this one moment in 2014 during the border crisis that just completely breaks the mold of who people think he is.
You're talking about the teddy bear moment.
The teddy bear moment. So there was this surge of unaccompanied migrant children showing up at the southern border. And Glenn Beck, who is on the record as being very strongly against illegal immigration.
You'd expect him to be down there with a megaphone telling them to go home.
That's what everyone expected. But instead, he traveled to the border with tractor trailers full of food, water, and teddy bears.
Teddy bears?
Teddy bears. And he helped distribute them to the refugee children. He went on camera crying and said, "We must open our hearts." He argued that while you can be for secure borders, these were children caught in the crossfire, and that basic human compassion had to come first.
That must have confused the heck out of his audience.
It confused everyone. But it showed this other, deeply compassionate and very contradictory side of him. He also runs something called the Nazarene Fund through his charity.
What does that do?
It claims to have relocated thousands of Christian refugees from ISIS-controlled territories in the Middle East, literally rescuing them from persecution.
So if you try to put all the pieces together, we have the shock jock who mocked a miscarriage.
Yeah.
We have the conspiracy theorist with the chalkboard. We have the crying prophet warning of the apocalypse. We have the savvy business mogul who pioneered subscription media. And we have the humanitarian delivering teddy bears to migrant children. It is a lot to take in.
It's a lot of contradictions to hold in one person. He contains, as the poet said, multitudes.
So if we're trying to sum this all up, trying to define his legacy, how do we do that?
I think you have to see him as the figure who successfully fused the paranoid style of American politics, that old-school fear of secret plots and internal enemies, with the emotional, visceral, high-energy engagement of a morning zoo radio host.
He made paranoia entertaining.
He made it entertaining, he made it emotional, he made it a daily drama. He taught millions of people that their feelings about the news were just as valid, if not more valid, than the actual facts of the news.
And he himself says, "I'm a rodeo clown."
Yeah.
He describes himself as an entertainer. Yet millions of people in his audience treat him as a historian, a theologian, a prophet.
And that right there is the provocative thought we should probably leave people with. Where does the performance end and the belief begin? Does he actually believe every single thing he says? Or is he just a master performer who is really, really good at keeping the audience hooked for the next segment?
That is something to chew on. Glenn Beck built this entire empire on the premise that he's exposing hidden truths. But if he views himself as a rodeo clown, a performer whose job is to distract the angry bull so the cowboy can get away, then who is the bull in his analogy? And are the people in the stands, his audience, are they in on the joke, or they think the clown is the only thing saving them from being gored?
That is the question, isn't it?
Thanks for diving deep with us on this one.
Always a pleasure. Until next time.